This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew Jones and with me as always is
Sarah Bolt.
How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. And how are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I believe you've been a little bit busy since we last spoke.
I have. I've been up to London. I spent the first 18 years of my life trying to escape it, and now I get quite excited when I go back. I was invited by the Society of Agriculture to go up to their launch, which was held at the House of Lords. So it was a lovely opportunity to go and dress up and represent the industry.
Meet anybody exciting and interesting?
Well, all sorts. It was full of the great and the good.
There's no name drops happening here then?
No, I'm not going to do any name drops. No, because if I started with one or two, the rest will all feel left out, wouldn't they?
Well, that's fair enough. No, that's grand. As long as you had a good time, as you say, it's nice to see a positive like this for the industry, with people trying to come together to make a one representative body to cover many aspects of to cover that aspect of the industry. So that's fantastic. Moving on to today's podcast. Well, we got approached about this probably 18 months ago, and I've got to admit, every time I either listen to it or record it, I keep getting a little bit of a burnt sensation on the back of my neck. It's obviously just one of those things when you think about it, isn't it?
It is.
But it's one we'd love people to share far and wide. While obviously it's aimed at people in agriculture and horticulture, there's a lot of good information in there that is relevant to everybody. So I know myself, I'm going to try and share it with the kids' rugby club and cricket club and school, just because it's such an important topic.
And anybody that spends any time outside, it's something that's really important.
Definitely. It's probably made, given the weather we've already had this year, it's probably made me use sun cream a bit more than I usually would. So hopefully that's a positive. So yes, let's go listen to today's podcast. This podcast has been brought to you today by Chewing the Cud Limited, who offer completely independent dairy and beef nutrition, cow signals advice and training, along with ROMS mobility scoring. For more details on these and other services available, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on nutrition@chewingthecud.com. Chewing the Cud Limited now offers first aid training from a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
And welcome to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry.
Farmer, advisor, processor, and everyone else. We have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We discuss the practical and the technical aspects of different UK dairy industry topics.
We aim to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself, can it be done differently?
Listen to us speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Or sign up to our website www.chewingthecud.com for podcast notifications so you never miss an episode.
And links to our socials, including Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast, all one word, and remember, no G.
Or email us direct on podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. Today we're going to talk about skin cancer. A little bit different, I know some of you may know, but our guest today, and then we'll get into the hows and whys, is Susanna Daniels, who is CEO for Melanoma Focus. Hello, Susanna.
Hello, lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're more than welcome. Now, this came about because one of Susanna's trustees happens to be a neighbour of one of our former guests who'd obviously mentioned she'd been on our podcast and reached out back in spring 2025 and said, "Oh, can we come on the podcast?" And it was like, "I'd love you to, just haven't got time this year." And they were like, "No, that's fine because we're doing a survey in agriculture, which will be available for 2026. So hence why we're here." More than happy to do it from my experience in Oz, where there was a lot more focus on skin cancer, melanoma. But before we get into all of that, Susanna, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thank you for having me. So my background, I'm an oncology pharmacist by background. So essentially, I've always worked in cancer services within hospitals. And I did that for many years. And then after doing that and being the lead cancer pharmacist, I decided I wanted to go to industry to work on one of the immunotherapies on the medical side. And really try and do sort of during working within the NHS, etc. But that was quite a challenge, and I felt I wasn't making a difference in how I was used to making a difference. But when I was in pharma, we used to sponsor Melanoma Focus's healthcare professional meetings. So I became aware of the charity, and I understood that they wanted to create a trial finder so that people could find out what trials were running in melanoma. So I contacted the CEO and I said, "Oh, I'll do that for you." And he said, "No, I need someone to take over the charity." Clearly, I have not got any charity experience, but he convinced me to apply, and he agreed to stay on for a year with me. And the rest is history. I've been here for 6 years and loving it. And yeah, I hadn't realized how much the charity sector props up the NHS, which I'm very pleased to be doing.
Well, as I say, it's funny where life takes you sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what many people may not realise, because it kind of surprised me a little bit, is melanoma is the 5th most common cancer in the UK.
It certainly is. And I think people don't realise and often dismiss melanoma as just a mole, and you don't need to worry about it. But you know, this is still a cancer, and anyone struck with a melanoma will know what it's like to have a cancer diagnosis and live with that. The fortunate thing is that most of these cases are diagnosed at an early stage. So what it's really important to do is that if you notice something that is a little bit odd, so a new or a changing mole or lesion, then contact your GP, and they might ask you to send a picture in, which will go through a secure messaging system, and that's absolutely normal and safe. And if they have any worries or they can't see the picture properly, they will send it over to a dermatologist to have a look at. And just because you're called doesn't mean you've got cancer, but the earlier that it's caught and dealt with, if it is melanoma, then the higher the survival rate is. So it's really, really important to know your skin and get checked out.
So, Susanna, can you tell us a little bit more about Melanoma Focus as a charity and what it does, please?
Of course. So the charity was set up by my predecessor in 2012, and it was set up, he merged 2 medical charities. So that is certainly one, a big part of our focus. And so we support healthcare professionals, and that's by putting on 2 accredited large conferences a year. We also create rare melanoma guidelines. So melanoma, most people know of it as the skin, whereas there are rare forms in the mucosal linings of your body and also in your eye. These are very, very rare. And we create the national guidelines. We also fund research for patient and public benefit. And then on the patient side, our trustee who set up and founded the patient conference, who you were referring to earlier, we've taken over the running and organisation of that conference. So that's an incredible conference, providing latest updates of melanoma medicine, to about 250, 300 patients and their loved ones. And it's an incredible, hopeful environment for patients to learn from each other as well. And then also for patients, we have a helpline, and that's for anyone with a worry about melanoma and its treatment and effects. We have 8 nurses, skin cancer nurse specialists, who will run that helpline. They all work in centres in the UK. And then I'm really, really keen on high quality patient information. So we have all of our patient information is accredited. And that's constantly reviewed. And I mentioned our trial finder. So we've got 2 versions to support healthcare professionals and one to support patients. So trials are a really important part of the patient pathway, so that it offers latest advances. And also you get very good, you'll be monitored very, very thoroughly while you're during any study. So that's kept up to date on our website. And then because nearly 9 in 10 melanomas are preventable, our third area is about awareness. And much of that work starts in May, which is Melanoma Awareness Month, and then will continue through the summer months, where it's not that melanoma is more common in the summer months, but it's because people tend to notice their skin more because they're wearing less clothing, because it's warmer. So they do tend to notice it, even though we do urge people to check their skin on a monthly basis. But awareness is really, really critical, because yes, it's the 5th most common cancer in the UK, but nearly 9 in 10 are preventable.
Well, I was going to say, if we take a step back, we're all of an age, I'm sure, that it wasn't sunscreen, it was suntan lotion, wasn't it? Where having a suntan was a good thing, and being out in the sun and having that suntan was going to protect you from the sun. And yet things have changed now. As I say, I obviously lived in Oz for 10 years, and we can talk about different things, but people certainly of a certain age over there will be very aware of their slip, slop, slap campaign, which was massive. Now, I looked it up yesterday. I didn't realize this started in 1981. Now, obviously, this sort of thing probably started there sooner than here, because they're more sun, more UV. But actually, this has been going on for 45 years we're talking there now. So this has been known about for a long time, and yet we're all still of an age when people went out in the sun and got themselves baked.
And Factor 8 was a strong strong screen, wasn't it? I mean, in my day.
Yeah, and people used to step down as well. They start off with 8 and then to 4, 2, and then the baby oil it would be. And yeah, I think we've come a long way, and you're absolutely right. The UV is much stronger in Australia, but there are learnings from Australia, and they've had very strong public health campaigns. And we know that unless you have repetitive campaigns, that's really, really important for the messaging to come across. And the government haven't invested in any national campaigns for years. But it's critical. We know that year on year, pretty much, the UV is getting, the index is getting warmer, and hotter every year, and the UV index is getting higher. So it's just, we're living in a world where you're not just going abroad to get and would be at risk of getting burnt. It's not just for the affluent; it's for anybody, at risk of getting burnt in this country.
For anybody that's not familiar with Sid the Seagull, it's slip on a shirt, slop on some sunscreen, and slap on a hat, ideally a broad brim hat so it covers your ears as well. But I do see now that's expanded to seek for seeking shade and slide for slide on some sunnies.
That's right. They've expanded it, and all of those things are important. And we also, we would advocate for that. It's not just about putting on sunscreen. It is about seeking shade and covering up where you can, and they're all really important factors.
So you mentioned there, Susanna, about burning, and when we burn our skin, what is it, or what do we need to understand about burning our skin and the risks associated with melanoma?
So melanoma is where the melanocytes, which are the pigment-producing cells in your body, grow out of control. And when you're in the sun, what can happen is that you can get some changes in the DNA in genetic changes. And it's a buildup of these changes. So your body's very clever and it can repair itself, but you can get a buildup of these changes over time. And then that can tip for some people into malignancy and into a cancer. So you could have two people that were exposed to the same amount of UV from the sun, and one of them gets melanoma and one of them doesn't. And some of it is down to luck. But it is the more time you spend in the sun and burning, and particularly burning in childhood. These are all really important factors. But obviously there are risk factors. So if you're more moly, if you've got very pale skin, these are other factors that make you more at risk of burning. So pale skin, pale eyes, that type 1 skin tone. It makes you more at risk of melanomas and other skin cancers.
Now, you've touched on it already, but you've talked about 2 signs. Now, you may disagree. When I was in Oz, they always talked about 3 signs. So do you just want to reaffirm what those 2 signs are, and I'll bring in what the third one was when I was in Oz?
Yeah, sure. So the most common, the thing that we say to look out for is that a mole or a lesion is changing. That's the most important thing to look out for, because not all melanomas will look and behave the same way. And the other thing is that if it just looks a bit odd, so it's the ugly duckling test. So it looks a little bit different to all your other moles or lesions. But there are some criteria which people say the A, B, C, D, E. So A is asymmetry, where if you put a mirror down the mole, it will look different on each side. B is borders, so you might have an irregular edge. C is color, so there might be different colors. D is diameter, saying that they're above about 6 millimeters, which is like the tip of your pencil. And then E is evolving. But not all melanomas will follow those criteria. So to keep it simple, and some melanomas are amelanotic, which means they have no color. And so to keep it simple, it's about the evolving nature, really, and that it looks different and odd to your other moles or lesions.
I was going to say, because the 2 that's classically talked about, as you say, is it a new mole? Is it a growing mole? And then certainly the one that was in Oz was if it was, as you say, basically a bigger than the size of a rubber on the end of your pencil. And I know off the back of that, and I'd totally forgotten about this until we were, preparing for this podcast. When I was in Queensland, I had a couple removed off me. Simply, he said, there's nothing to worry about, but it is just a precaution because they're bigger than, they'd always been there all my life, I remember. But because they were the size they were, they just took them off.
But again, they're not all melanomas are above the size of a pencil. So some of them are smaller, hence why, is it changing or is it new? Does it look a bit odd? Just they're the things that to really look out for.
Yeah, and I'll throw in another one that was a bit different. When I lived in Queensland, they had a service called Mole Scan. And it was basically health professionals. I think it was on their time. I'm not entirely sure what it was exactly. But I just remember my girlfriend at the time booking me in and saying, you're doing this. You walked in, you stripped down to your underwear, particularly if you've got a lot of moles, and they basically just examined every mole on your body and then gave you a yay or a nay. And it was sort of one of those things you did once a year just to cover yourself.
And you know what? It's brilliant to have things that, that was available. And unfortunately, that isn't available on the NHS, apart from people who perhaps have had previous melanomas or have got syndromes where they've got a large number of moles, or you can pay for things like that privately. But I suppose in lieu of that, we've got information on our website about how to check your skin, how you can check your own skin, you do it yourself, but also, how in videos, etc. And we've got a skin check leaflet to run through it. So not as easy as doing that, but at least, keeping an eye on your moles and lesions yourself is something that we can all do.
I was going to say another one. I'm just thinking maybe some wives and girlfriends might not like. I knew somebody that had a skin cancer on his face was recommended by his doctor to grow a beard because it helped protect his face from the sun.
Yeah, and it does, but it's still, you are covering it, but it depends how thick your beard is, but also You've still got to, your hair. People get melanomas on their scalps, and they might have a whole head of hair. So it's not going to protect you. I say, that's not going to be enough.
No, exactly. I'm not saying it's going to be enough, but it was certainly something he was recommended. And funnily enough, most of the men in North Queensland did have full beards. I know I had one myself, and it was protected you from the sun. But I'd also say it protected you from the rain when you got into a storm season and wet season. But that's a whole nother question.
So, sort of bringing this to a farming audience, obviously farmers and people that work in outdoor industries, that they are outdoors a lot more. UV is therefore affecting them a lot more. What can farmers and other outdoor people be doing just to protect themselves, I guess, a little bit more? This is something that can be prevented. How can they go about doing?
Well, it's the simple protection, like all of us, is really wearing sunscreen, but also reapplying it. So that's really, really important. It's not just about putting it on at the beginning of the day. And we don't recommend once daily sunscreens either. They're not, and from when you were in Australia, they wouldn't have been allowed to sell once daily sunscreens. Anything that prevents reapplication is not permitted. So in Australia, that's why it's not allowed, because none of us put it on as it was, in laboratory conditions, as it would have been done, when it was tested. So reapplication every 2-ish hours is really, really important. But as we talked about earlier, covering up, wearing a hat, seeking shade where possible. I appreciate, if you're working outdoors, that might not be possible, but seeking shade if that's a possibility.
And just to emphasize, by a hat again, a broad brim hat rather than just a cap.
Yes.
So I think that probably just the culture of perhaps farmers, the thought of putting on even probably just using a moisturizer or anything else. I'm particularly thinking of the males within the industry. How do you think we can try and encourage particularly male farmers to actually use sunscreen? Because I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we've got. I think females within the industry, it might be slightly different, but particularly from a male point of view.
I think from a male point of view, across the general public, I think it's more of an issue. And we found that with our national surveys in 2025. So we found that about 50% of Brits, general public, suffer from sunburn at least once a year. And only about just over a third said that they rarely or never apply sunscreen in the summer months in the UK. But that was higher in men. So it was 42% in men. But we did also survey the agricultural industry and the horticultural industry. And whereas it was about 50% of Brits who would suffer from sunburn at least once a year, it was just over 75%. So we're going from about 50% to 75%. So 3/4 of agricultural workers remember getting, a burning at least once a year.
Do you think that's because the general public usually only go out in the sun when they're on holiday, so therefore, or the weekend, whatever, so
I think they're out in the sun more, so I think that's why it's more problematic.
And when they do put sunscreen on, whereas
I don't know, the general public are not putting sunscreen on in the same way, but I think it's because the agricultural industry are outside more. So, but it was higher, it was 52%. So about half of them were saying they've never or rarely wear sunscreen in the summer months. And we asked why, and about a third said it was because they forget. About a quarter said they don't expect to burn. And I've spoken to people before, in the farming industry, and it's just that, feeling that you build up this tolerance over years and that your skin's weathered and, you don't need to, which isn't the case. And I suppose a worrying bit is that about 10%, so, don't because they can't afford it. But that's another issue. But I just want to say, when putting sunscreen on, you talked about a wide brim hat, which is really important to protect your ears. because people often forget to put sunscreen as well on the tops of their ears. And that is an area, not just your head, but your tops of your ears where you're at risk of getting melanoma. I mean, the men, that's the most common areas are their torso, often because they're probably just going around with their tops off, but also their scalp is, a neck. Whereas for women, the most common areas are their limbs, so arms and legs.
It's as much as you say, it is about the culture, because it's making me think, it starts almost back in school in Oz. I mean, you don't get it here, but, each school has to be sun safe. The kids can, if they don't wear a broad brim, have to, if they wear a cap, have to have one like with a Foreign Legion, that covers the back of the neck. They have to have shade areas available. And I mean, I certainly remember, all right, we're going back a fair few years now, but, when it was the sun was out, instead of staying in the tarmac playground, we had some nice trees to hide under. We got kicked up to the sports field where there was no shade. And personally, it was just something I always hated, because I've always been a shade seeker, not a sun seeker. But it's the culture starting right from the beginning, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there are things that happen in some primary schools, but secondary schools, there's nothing. And I think, we can, even as parents, you'll be modeling, and that's really important that you model for your children in putting sunscreen on and covering up, etc. But once they get to teenage years, they're making their own mind up. And so, you can buy it all you like, but that's, it's still, you don't want those. It's a difficult battle, but they need to understand it as well. And it's not just about sun. It's also about sunbeds as well. And TikTok and social media has a lot to answer for, because and the misinformation about sunbeds, about sunscreen, I think doesn't help when you've got influencers talking about these factors.
Isn't it funny how sunbeds, as you say, seem to be coming back round again? Whereas again, we're of an age where they were very popular, 80s, and then they were the risks were highlighted. They went very out of fashion, and yet it does seem to be now for the younger generation now, it almost seems to be they're back in, and say because you've got social media influencers, it's becoming aware of them. But isn't it funny how I won't say, or life in general, lessons of the past are forgotten?
It's quite scary, actually, and they're being marketed for well-being as well. So I think there's a lot of misinformation put out there about sunbeds, which is really, really worrying. We know from our survey work last year that 34% of 16 and 17-year-olds are using sunbeds. They are banned in under 18s. So that's, it's really problematic. Young skin is particularly vulnerable. We know that one serious sunburn in childhood doubles the risk of melanoma later on in life. So young skin, we do need to be protecting that skin. But yeah, and I think because they're on the high street as well, it sort of normalizes them as if they're fine. But actually they are not. And there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done there.
So thinking about sort of UV light and sort of nail bars, the men listening to this are gonna go, what's Sarah on about? But we're getting more and more females in the industry, and a lot of them are having very nice nails whilst they're out on farm and working. What with acrylics that you can, they're much hardier than they used to be. Are there risks associated with sort of the UV lamps for nail bars? And
so it's the jury's out there, actually. It's quite interesting. The rates of melanomas on hands haven't got higher. But that said, you can get, and it's worth asking in various nail bars, instead of UV lamps, LED drying lamps. So it's worth probably asking if they know about them or if they can get them in. Certainly, there's a theoretical risk, but I haven't seen that played out. But it is, who knows? Because more and more people are getting their nails done regularly, and
starting younger as well.
Starting younger, and so it's probably worth putting sunscreen on your nails before you go in, because just to mitigate that risk.
Thank you. I think it's something to be thinking about.
Yes.
Not something I know a lot about, if I'm perfectly honest.
I don't know, Andrew. Why not?
My name's not Eddie Izzard, but there you go. It is. It's and the daft thing is, people look at me when I'm stupid when I say something. It says we talked about covering yourself up. Now I've often had this. So aren't you hot? And it's like, well, if you get in the summer, I'd rather wear a thin shirt that covers me. Well, yeah, me going topless is not something you want to see. But I mean, I'd rather cover up. And people go, well, aren't you hot? Well, actually, if you're wearing the right clothing, you're actually cooler because you're not absorbing that heat, I guess, off the sun.
Yeah, I think it is just changes in attitudes. And I think people need to understand, what the UV index is as well. The UV index is a measure of the strength of the sun's rays. And so we recommend you don't need to be wearing sunscreen all year round. It's just when the UV index is 3 or above. So the higher the UV index, the higher the strength. And that tends to be 3 or above from about sort of May time anyway. So so April, May, until October time. So that's something. It's not something you need to be wearing all year round.
So you alluded to the survey that you did looking specifically at agriculture and horticulture. Were there any other findings that were interesting compared to the general public that you can share with us?
I suppose, as I sort of alluded to, is that it was also the 52% never or so about half rarely or never wearing sunscreen, and about over a third of farmers rarely or never cover their skin with clothing. So I think that was a real worry when they're working outdoors. So again, just despite them spending a lot of their time working outside, it's just that change in culture.
You mentioned sunscreen there. What factors should people be using? Ideally, you've said not once a day. But I can't remember, was it here or was it in Australia recently? There was a big hoo-ha that they tested a load of sunscreens and they weren't what they were supposed to be. So what factor and what should people be looking out for a good quality sunscreen?
People should be wearing factor 30 plus sunscreen. So that's factor 30 or factor 50. There's not a huge amount of difference between them. But also they should be looking at the star rating. So there'll be a star rating on the bottles as well. And that's to look at, so the SPF is the protection against UVB. And because there are 2 types of radiation that can cause skin cancer and that come from the sun. And then the star rating is about protection against UVA. And that you're looking for a 4 or a 5-star rating. And then the other things to sort of think about is that when you, in terms of the differences between sunscreens, there are things called chemical or organic sunscreens. And they will protect your skin by absorbing the sun's rays, and it will undergo a chemical reaction and prevent it from damaging your skin. And most sunscreens are sort of chemical or organic. However, you can get mineral or physical sunscreens, or inorganic, sunscreens, and they will protect your skin by deflecting the sun's rays. And these contain zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And if you've got skin conditions or your skin can get quite irritated, it's better that you're using one of these physical or inorganic sunscreens because you're more likely to not get irritation or flare-ups of your skin. And so that's really, really important. There's sadly been misinformation going out about that sunscreens are harmful and are they harmful? But actually, that is so much misinformation on social media that sunscreens are causing harm. And there's absolutely no scientific evidence around that. But actually, billions of people have used sunscreen, and there's such a body of evidence of well-researched demonstrating that sunscreen prevents skin cancers. And then I suppose that in terms of other things to look out on the sunscreen bottle, you'll see something on a bottle about like a lid opening, and it might say 12 months or 6 months or something. And that's basically saying how long the bottle can be used once it's been opened. So if you use it longer than that time, then it will just have lost some of its potency. So that's just something else just to think about.
So from what you're saying, then we want to be looking for a high SPF, so 30 or 50, high star rating, and really you need to be changing that every year.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And we say that the best sunscreen is the one that you're going to use. So that's the best one.
I'd not come across that star rating before. That's something new to
Have
me.
a look.
I'd heard of UV, and UVB, but I hadn't noticed or come across that star rating. So that's a really interesting one.
So sometimes, we'll talk about a broad spectrum sunscreen, and that's what it's talking about. It's talking about protection against UVA and UVB. It's important to be protected from both.
I think I might have seen the stars, but meant nothing to me. I guess I probably thought it was just, relation to the SPF, but what you're saying is really they are two different things.
They are two different things, yeah. And then just going back to the UV index, so you can find out the UV index for the day in most weather apps. So that will tell you what the UV index is. So as I said, if it's 3 or above, that's when you should be wearing sunscreen and covering up, wearing a broad brimmed hat, seeking shade.
And I think we wouldn't even think about that from sort of April, would we? We'd maybe think about it on a 25 degree plus day, but perhaps not just sort of on it's 18 degrees and the sun's out. We perhaps wouldn't, or I certainly wouldn't think about it.
Yeah, I think it's really changing our norms there, because it is really important, because we've all got caught out on those cloudy days where you think it's not warm. It's because the UV index is higher than you think.
So, Susanna, what about vitamin D? Because everyone tells us that we need the sun for some vitamin D. What are the facts and figures for that?
So you're right. So there's a relationship between vitamin D and sun exposure. And in the summer, just short periods of time every day in the sun with your legs and forearms exposed without sunscreen can produce sufficient vitamin D for most people. But in the winter months, UVB rays are not strong enough to produce sufficient vitamin D in our skin. So we talked about that UVA and UVB. UVB is responsible for vitamin D in our skin. There are other ways because there is a complicated relationship between the sun and our skin. And so, yes, sun exposure is important, but you can get vitamin D from other factors. And so that can be through our diet. So oily fish, eggs, red meat, mushrooms, and obviously fortified cereals, where you might see it, and then vitamin supplements, which is what some people take. So often it's a good idea to particularly take vitamin supplements in the winter months. And people with darker skin tend to have lower levels of vitamin D because they get less absorption of vitamin D from the sun. So they also may be more at risk of lower levels of vitamin D. So yeah, it's a complicated relationship, but generally it's just reasonable. At the beginning and the end of the day when the UV index is lower, you can just expose your body to the sun. But again, if that's the time where, it's best just put on sunscreen before you go out in the morning, then do it, because, it will wear off, and before you put it on the next time, you will be producing, if you're outdoors the whole time, I'm sure you'll be producing enough vitamin D from the slight exposure that you will get anyway. So I'm sure anyone working outdoors will be absolutely fine wearing sunscreen.
Yes. So you've spoken a little bit. So any other, not just in farming, but any other things that worried you or you were unexpected with the survey you did last year?
I think one of the concerns with the agricultural industry and farming is that is recognizing that farm safety goes beyond your own livestock or your own sort of what you're looking after. It's really, you really need to sort of be thinking about yourself as well. And working in agriculture means you're working and spending a lot of time outside. And so you have much more sun exposure potentially than people who work indoors. So it's recognizing that these are risks. And I suppose if you're an employer, and you're employing people, then it's a risk, and it's it's a health and safety risk of your employees. So I would suggest it's really important that you and you can provide sunscreen for your employees, which I think is just as important. It's not just about people putting it on themselves. I think it's a health and safety measure for people to consider.
And you talked staff there, which is grand, because I think I was just about to suggest that. What about supplying it? And you've done that. Most people would have children. Is there anything different we should be doing with children, or the same basic message of slip, slop, slap, shade and slide?
I think it really is the same messaging, but I think it's really important because we know that people don't model very well as well. We just, we'll put it on our kids, or some people will put it on the kids, but they won't put it on themselves. And that's really important because, kids will see that and they'll think, well, even if they haven't, they're not arguing with you, against that, they will have clocked it. So it's really important that, I read a stat that 91% will put sunscreen on their kids, but only 25% will put it on themselves. So very important to be putting on sunscreen. Just because you haven't put it on sunscreen all your lives, don't be thinking, oh, I'm doomed. What's done is done, because if you haven't got a melanoma, it doesn't mean you can still protect your skin and prevent any future melanomas. So it's just really important that you do look after your skin. It's the largest organ on your body. And if you sort of were told, if I put, if there was a cream that could prevent lung cancer, would you use it? So if there was a cream to prevent breast cancer, would you use it? Well, this is a cream to prevent skin cancer. Use it, as well as covering up, etc., and wearing that hat. So it is really important. We're so far behind, where, the learnings and repetitive learnings in Australia, because it does take years of change, behaviours. And, we have campaigns in all the service stations across the UK in May, but it's going to take a lot more than that. And yeah, I think it's really looking after our children, looking after ourselves, as well as, what you're doing on the farm.
I think what I'm sort of going through my head at the moment is that as an industry, we're all feel that we need to be resilient and strong, and actually we're therefore not very good about talking about health, mental health, and all of those sorts of things. And it's actually thinking about how we can change that culture, that it's all right not to or it's all right to be able to talk about these things and actually share concerns and actually talk about it. So I think that's what's sort of running through my mind at the moment, that how can we keep this conversation going after this podcast?
Yeah, and when we did all this work in 2025, we created posters and bespoke posters for the agricultural industries, because we just felt it was really, really important that some of them are aimed at the younger generation as well, and we've got social media assets that aimed at the farming industry, because it's really important. It's important that we've got to sort of teach these messages, but be open about it. Have sunscreen available if you're working on a larger farm, have it available for your staff, but also, making sure that you're looking after yourself, because if you're not looked after, then who's going to look after your farm?
I think that's a really good message, and I really, really like that. And I think it's what we need to really be thinking about. And I guess it's just a sort of a bit of a plea to the industry, people that are listening to this podcast and not necessarily farming themselves, is to actually thinking about how they can broach this subject on farm, and how they can perhaps talk about it and keep the subject alive, as it were.
That's a very good point. I mean, as you say, I mean, if you don't look after yourself, who else will? Or look after then the farm. It's not just skin cancer, but anything like that. It is ultimately your health is what matters, isn't it? But obviously, we're here today to talk about skin cancer. And as I say, when I was originally approached a year ago, I was more than happy to do it because it's just something that's not talked about enough here. And I guess it's only because of my experience in Oz that made me much more aware of it. And even then, I don't know it all at all, don't get me wrong, but made me much more aware of it and was more than happy to do it because, say, as an industry here, it just doesn't get talked about. I've never heard anyone sort of it be on their radar that it's something they should be talking about. And as you say, the last couple of years, if we're to be believed, we're supposed to be getting, longer, hotter, drier summers. Therefore, this is going to become more prevalent. So let's start doing the good things now to start actioning it now so that, you're getting the best chance possible for your skin.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I've heard oncologists say that they've had patients who have been perplexed when they've been, had a diagnosis of melanoma that's spread, throughout their body. And they've sort of said, well, I've never been on a beach. I've never sunbathed. And surprised that, discussing, never been abroad. But actually, it's just being aware of the dangers of the sun and the sun in this country. And it's just that burning. And particularly, as we've spoken about, burning when you're younger years, that's really, really critical.
We've said it's the fifth most common cancer in the UK. What does that mean in terms of real stats for people listening?
So 1 in 35 men and 1 in 41 women in the UK will now be diagnosed with melanoma skin cancer in their lifetime. So that doesn't mean you're going to die from melanoma. And if you're looking around at 35 men, that one of you will get it at some point. But melanoma is the most serious form of skin cancer because it has the highest mortality rate, so people can die from it. However, if you catch it early, it's more about dealing with it at that stage, and you will be cured. Most people are cured if it's caught early.
What is the treatment for most people if they catch it early? Is it just simply removal or?
Yeah, it's surgery. So it is removal. But the risk is that it can spread to other parts of your body. And that's something that if you did have a melanoma, you'd be monitored for as well. And you also will need to be monitoring your skin. But if you have had a melanoma, you're at risk of further melanomas because of your skin tone, really, because that's what you're at risk. You are more at risk. So it's something you do need to be careful. So because if a family member has melanoma, it doesn't mean it's not normally, most cases, it's not a genetic thing. It's just that you've inherited a skin tone. So that's why you might be more, just as likely or at risk of getting, not just as likely, but at risk of getting a melanoma or another skin cancer.
So really, it's got to be reaffirm the message of the old slip, slop, slap, hasn't it? People have just got to start looking after themselves and think about this on a more, as a more regular part of their routine, not just during those hot days, but maybe from April onwards, monitor the UV on the various different phone apps, weather apps on their phone. You said it's above 3, was it, on the UV, to ensure that they start using it. Use something with a high SPF, with a good star rating, ideally one that you're applying every couple of hours. And if I remember right, is it you ideally should put it on about half an hour before you go out in the sun at the beginning of the day?
Yeah, you should. You should be doing that ideally. But you do what, you have to do what works with you as well. But definitely the reapplication is really, really important. And, don't be thinking if you notice something on your skin that you've definitely got a melanoma or another skin cancer. Honestly, in most cases, it will be nothing. But do get yourself checked out. It's really important to check your skin and contact your GP if you notice a new or a changing mole or lesion or something that just looks a little bit odd to you. 9 in 10 cases are preventable. So do look after yourselves.
So just looking at it, I think it's time we pull this to a close. So any last words of wisdom from yourself, Susanna?
No, I hope that we can continue to work with the farming industries just to ensure that we can, and we're there to help and support. We've got lots of information on our website about awareness. We've got posters, we've got social media assets. So yeah, let's support each other in sharing those important messages about sun safety and knowing your skin.
Sarah?
I think it's highlighted to me how actually it is a preventative disease, and that the risks are quite high for people that spend a lot of time outside, but actually we can do so much for ourselves to prevent it. And I think it's something that perhaps should be included in any sort of farm health and safety risk assessment. I think that it's not something that I've ever thought of before when talking to farmers on that topic, and perhaps it's something, that does need to come into it. And just saying about providing sunscreen for employees, I think is a really nice thing that farmers are able to do to help with that prevention.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, as you say, when I agreed with this, it was, having the experience I've had. And really, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it is looking after yourself. Look, I'm just as guilty as the next person, undoubtedly. And, the kids are sent to, in the summer, must have sunscreen, must have a hat. And then do I do it myself? Well, I always got a hat on, but do I, a cap on, but do I put the sunscreen on? No. It isn't unusual, maybe once, twice a year, for the back of my neck to get burnt because I don't apply that sunscreen. Must do better. But really, it comes down to, I'll mention it again, if nothing else, remember the 5 S's. So slip on a shirt, slop on some sunscreen, slap on a hat, ideally broad-brimmed, seek some shade, and slide on some sunnies to protect your eyes. I mean, it's really important. And while this podcast is aimed at the dairy industry, I think everything we said here should apply to anybody and everybody. So if you've got any friends, family listening outside the industry that you think this is worth them listening to, then please share it, because it's just as relevant to them as it is to people in the industry. This is something that potentially can affect anybody. It just happens that, obviously, from the work Melanoma Focus have done, that those in the agricultural industry are more prone to not doing some of the right things than doing the right things. And that's what we as an industry need to be talking about, hence why we're here today. And I was more than happy to do this. But on that note, I guess it's time to draw it to close. So I guess it's a goodbye from me.
It's a goodbye from me, and thank you ever so much, Susanna.
It's an absolute pleasure. Lovely speaking to you both.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses, or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingshay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.